Welcome to Your Pharmacy Career Podcast, proudly produced by Ravens Recruitment, the experts in pharmacy career and locum services for over 30 years. Every episode is your gateway to new opportunities in the pharmacy profession. From expert advice to inspiring success stories, we're here to spark ideas, guide your career, and help you achieve your goals. Stay tuned. The next step in your pharmacy journey starts here.
Welcome back. I'm your host, Christy Lee Patterson, and today's guest is someone who's helped shape the future of pharmacy in Australia. Professor Lisa Nissen is the Program Director and Taylor Family Chair at the Centre for the Business and Economics of Health at the University of Queensland. That is a bit of a mouthful. Her work has led to groundbreaking changes in pharmacy scope of practice, including pharmacist-led immunisations and treatment of UTIs, just to mention a couple. Lisa, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me here.
Now, Lisa, the first question I ask most people is, why did they become a pharmacist? So I'll hand over to you. What was your reason for jumping into the pharmacy land?
It's not a straightforward journey. I think I often describe myself as an accidental pharmacist. My family had some ideas about what I should be when I grow up, including, being an engineer or something similar to other people in my family. I had aspirations to be, a pro golfer.
Oh, wow.
Which were quickly squashed by my mum, who told me that I could always play golf, but, I should have a career. Golf is more a hobby. I'm glad you enjoy it, but it's a hobby, not a career. And probably at that time it really was early days for golf as a career for women. But ironically, I played schoolgirls golf with Kari Webb, who is one of our most famous female golfers in Australia. So maybe mum was wrong, who can say. But that kind of meant that, if I didn't want to be one thing, what was I going to be? And I liked science. And they were the kind of things that I gravitated towards. I was very interested in how things worked, why things happened. And so I chose to do science at uni as my first choice, mostly because I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I just thought it might be a good thing. But luckily, I was living in a residential college on campus, and there's like a smorgasbord of people's individual lived experiences of different courses and programs. And I lived with a lot of people that were doing health courses, and they were doing really, really interesting things. And I spent a lot of my second semester at university going to the prac classes for OT. I made myself a wicker chair, did woodwork with them.
Oh, wow.
Well, this is amazing, very practical and applied kind of way of helping people. I really liked the philosophy that it was keeping people in their activities of daily living, but it was really quite science. And so at the end of that, I thought maybe I'll do something in that area. And I applied actually to do occupational therapy. Interestingly, I didn't quite get into OT, but I had to have a second choice on my form. And when I went into science, they basically, first lecture said, look to your left, look to your right. Two of you, won't have a job at the end of this. There's no careers in science. I was like,
wow, that's inspirational.
So I'm guessing my second choice won't be staying in science. I'm going to have to do something else.
Yeah.
And I really, had liked chemistry out of all of my sciencey things at school. Probably didn't know what I was getting into for university chemistry, but, at school it seemed reasonable. And I thought if I'm going to, do something that's helpful to people, I'd had a really amazing interaction as a young person with our family chemist, Mike Smith's chemist at Currumbin, and Gary West, went on to take over that pharmacy. And they were always really friendly, approachable. They knew about you and who you were. They were really helpful. And they always had jelly beans. They always had a jar of jelly beans that they gave us when we were kids. And I thought, well, it appears that, chemistry and this profession might be related. I didn't really know much more about it other than that. And as it happens, I then became an accidental pharmacist because I didn't get into OT. I got an offer to do pharmacy. And so I said, okay, I'll go do that. And I guess the rest is history from there.
Wow, what a career for an accidental pharmacist. I love it.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
Was there any other things that happened in your life growing up that's like impacted or shaped your path or purpose in life?
Yeah, I think so. Look, I had really great role models with my parents. I think, they're very giving people. They're very giving people. Mum's a very giving person, engaged with, community organisations. She's turning 90 and she still, volunteers and does volunteer work. She volunteered to help in any of the things I was involved in when I was a kid, actively. Didn't just drive me there. She was on the committee, she was the secretary, she was, really engaged. And I think I sort of reflected a lot on that. And Dad was very, very much a helping person. Like, he'd give you the shirt off his back if it would help you. So I kind of grew up in that environment about, I think, helping other people and seeing that you're part of something a bit bigger than maybe just your family unit and the things that you yourself are doing. And that was just kind of all around me while I was growing up. And I kind of reflect back and I think, well, the sort of drive to do some of the things as I've gone along has been sort of influenced by that environment. And I think other people probably heard variously that, my dad passed away when I was 15, which is kind of a tough time to lose a parent. But he'd been unwell. He'd had some health issues that sort of transpired while I was in primary school. And so he'd had a sort of altered ability to sort of continue his full-time work. He worked from home and did activities for people. He did jobs for people from home and, managed that around his health. And I think, again, people have said, well, when your dad died, did you decide that you're just going to go into healthcare? And I'm like, well, kind of no, probably consciously not. I didn't just suddenly go, I'm going to be a cardiologist or a pharmacist, because there were definite things now in hindsight in his trajectory that, were health-related system problems, and he had some medication-related problems, and I could have gone, I'm going to do that and I'm going to go and fix it. But it didn't immediately come into my mind that I have to go into healthcare because I have to fix the experience that he had. But I reflect constantly on the experience that he had and what was preventable within his experiences in the work that I do now. So it's kind of maybe this sort of almost pervasive subconscious influence that it's had in maybe helping guide me to where I ended up. Maybe there is a greater thing that helps you be led to the thing that's going to make the biggest influence in your life.
Yeah, interesting. I was just reflecting on your story, and I think when you were talking about your mum also being very heavily involved in committees and organisations and things like that as you're growing up, those values, like I know I can see that from a distance of knowing what you're getting involved in pharmacy as well. And so I can definitely see that that's probably had maybe a subconscious impact throughout your life as well, having those values as a child.
And I think part of it, to my detriment sometimes, is I have a really strong social justice drive. Like I can't stand injustice, social justice. And I think it very much comes from mum and dad's sort of influences that, if somebody needs your help, you help them. It doesn't matter who they are. And that kind of viewpoint that if you want something to be different, you can't be a bystander in it, that you have to engage in the things that you're doing to get the most out of them yourself, but for also, things that you want to have make a difference. So I think it's absolutely come rooted firmly. Even if it's subconsciously when you're young, you don't kind of realise it, but as I've got older, I kind of know now where that's come from.
That's it. Actually, it's funny when as you get older and then you start to see, some of yourself in your parents, and you're sitting there listening to them, and then you think, oh my gosh, I'm acting more and more like my mum every day.
Yeah, well, when you get married, don't they say, look at the mother of your partner or whatever, because that's what they're going to turn into if it's a wife, yes. Or, it's like, well, there you go, Catherine. Yes, I'm going to be my mum in the future. So
Good luck.
Hope you like her.
That is hilarious. And so, Lisa, if I could just maybe start chatting now about your career. So we've talked about your childhood and moving into pharmacy as the accidental pharmacist, but I guess you didn't just go straight into being an academic. What were those early, career journey years for you? What did that look like?
Yeah, so I was lucky during university to be a rural scholar. So I applied to be one of the bonded students for Queensland Health to go work in rural practice after I finished uni. I have family connections and kind of grew up around country life and really respect, the communities and the nature of those communities and I've really enjoyed them. And I thought, well, I'd really like an opportunity to do that and particularly to work in that context in the hospital sector. I really had worked out that maybe community pharmacy wasn't for me as a long-term prospect at that point in time, and maybe I wanted to try hospital, and we didn't get a lot of experience in that during my undergrad year. So following my graduation, I had a year, my internship in a metropolitan hospital. So I was at Redcliffe Hospital, which is just north of Brisbane. It's not a medium-sized hospital, but very comprehensive. But then I went out and worked in the country. So went out to Charleville in Western Queensland. It's, 8.5 hours drive directly west of Brisbane. It's basically in the middle of nothing. The community itself is fairly small, but looking after, I think, 9 hospitals and 13 health services as a, newly registered pharmacist was a fairly confronting and fairly steep learning curve. But I think it was a real time when I understood the value that pharmacists in communities could contribute. I worked part-time for the local community pharmacist on weekends, and the role that pharmacists played and he played in the community and the pharmacist in that health service was playing was significant. And it was broader than the scope of practice I would have had if I'd gone into the Royal Brisbane or a metropolitan service, bled into working a lot more with allied health and community health services, and I learned how to put in cannulas, take blood, do x-rays.
Wow, this is amazing.
Yeah, so whole type of different, activities, because they kind of said anybody that's here that's got 2 hands and is somewhat competent, we'll use them when we need different things to happen. And that was an amazing learning experience. I think personally it was challenging as a rainbow person in a remote rural community in the 90s, not necessarily flush with lots of people from the community around me.
That's so true.
And a lot of biases and homophobia as well, which made some of my life more challenging because at that point in time I determined that I wasn't going to be in a closet trying to pretend I wasn't who I was. I went out fully functionally a rainbow.
Yeah, wow. Especially in that time too, like as you said, it was very different to what it is now.
Very different. And, I had aspirations to continue to do education, do some postgrad work and others. And I embarked on some of that and it was very, very hard. I tried to do some research stuff too that the university was connecting with us to do, and it was very, very hard. I just didn't have any real peers around me. The nearest sort of pharmacist was, Toowoomba, which is, frankly, from a hospital point of view, a really long way away. And so I eventually decided to come back, that I need to come back to a metropolitan community for a number of reasons. Ended up at the Children's Hospital. And I think that in itself was really a great experience for sort of casting me on my future trajectory. When I arrived, the director said, if you're here, you need to be involved in SHPA at the time.
Oh, okay, interesting.
There was sort of a history of the department being engaged in SHPA. So I think my first role was as a minutes secretary or something. So you can come on the committee and you're going to get involved in doing these activities. And I was like, yeah, okay, that sounds fair. If I'm working in this space, I need to be involved in this kind of stuff. And I eventually went on to be the president of the state branch over, a few years and was in that role for a while. But I think also it exposed me to clinical teaching And we had students, all sorts of students, not just pharmacy students that we were engaged with. And that sort of made me think that, one, pharmacists weren't being used as well as they could be, because I knew a lot, but, I spent a lot of time sort of doing stuff, getting permission for, that was a time when you could change the prescription and say, I just called the doctor. But I felt really frustrated that pharmacists weren't being used very well. But I also was reflecting on what I learned at uni, and I thought, well, hang on, these people that are coming from university to the hospital on their visit or their placement, or they don't understand what pharmacists can do and how exciting the role can be and how much they can contribute to the system. And so that was the real game changer for me about wanting to go back to teach in the university. I thought, I can go back and I can tell them my story. I can tell them the things that I've been able to be involved in and what I've seen and how pharmacists really can be used in healthcare. And it's very patient-facing and it's working with other people in the clinical team, and, you can make a huge impact. But the university said, only be a teacher here if you've got a PhD. And I'm like,
yes, okay. It's not something you can just tick off really quickly and easily.
Yeah, so they didn't have conjoint appointments with the Children's Hospital. They didn't really have conjoint appointments at all at that point in, life. But I thought, okay, well, that's really sucky, because I really,
yes.
I would like to, and I sort of tried lots of different ways, how can I contribute,
yes.
Can I give some guest lectures? I'm happy to, help with tutorials, I'll do whatever I need to do to help out. And then it's like, no, you have to have a PhD to be here, which I found really a bit challenging. And at the same time that I decided to sit the GAMSAT exam. The graduate program was new at that time. So the graduate entry pathway, it was about the second year of GAMSAT. Sat the GAMSAT exam and did an interview, had an offer to get into a program. But, at the same time, one of the academics that I really respected from when I was at university, Marie Smith, came to me with a project that she thought I would be interested in, which was in the area of pain, which I was already quite interested in from working in oncology and palliative care. And so I had this dilemma in front of me. It's like, do you, because I'm pissed with the system and I feel like, I'm not able to influence it enough. And, so in my mind, I'm like, okay, well, I need to be up the top of that food chain. That's got the power and the control, right?
Exactly.
Which is an obvious thing. If you can't sort of influence, you can't make a difference from here. You need to go to the spot where you can.
The top.
And then I thought, well, I could do that, but actually I could help, to tell generations of pharmacists and pharmacy students about the thing that they can do and change the system that way. So rather than one by one when they come and I chew their ear off while they're on placement,
yes,
and they run away or just get stuck inside a hospital as, a doctor trying to change the system and saying, hey, why don't you work with all these other people and pharmacists can do stuff. And what about these people? I had to have a more pervasive opportunity to influence. And so hence, I decided to do a PhD, which, set me off on the trajectory that I've kind of ended up in now.
And how was that experience of doing a PhD? Like, I obviously have not done one, and it's funny, it actually terrifies me, the thought of actually having to do one, but then I've studied continuously since I finished uni, even though I said when I finished uni, oh, great, now I don't have to do any more study, and I've continued it every single year since. But, yeah, maybe for those that are listening, the PhD, maybe what was that like in a few sentences? Like, was it?
Yeah, I mean, the PhD journey was really good because for me, it taught me a lot of skills that I didn't already have and I didn't possess. I've been a practitioner for a while, so, it wasn't about learning new clinical things as such. It was learning project management in a way that, is a completely different scale. I learned, a whole pile of things about different, ways to think about thinking strategically about problems and processes and outcomes and framing things, in the appropriate way. So I was really aware that I was developing tools that I could use somewhere else and for other things. That, I wasn't necessarily going to be a pain specialist for the rest of my life, although, it was an area that I really enjoyed. And as part of my PhD, I also do a lot of work with pharmacists as care coordinators in rural areas. I won't explain how that happened, but that was part of some funding out of some of the early guild agreements. And it just showed how adaptable those skills and techniques across different projects. And then I've just gone on to do that forever. So I think what it gives you is a discrete period of time to spend going fairly deeply and richly into that area of thinking more about thinking, which we don't get to do always when we're clinicians. I think, we're working clinically at the coalface, you don't get to go and do a systematic review and look at how other people have approached that. You have to make a decision, and you're just responding really quickly all of the time, and you're doing the best thing with the best information that you have available at that time. Whereas this gives you a chance to kind of step back and say, okay, what are all of the options that I could use? And how could I think about, maybe approaching it differently than I would have if I just went with my first instinct? And I've really appreciated that as I've gone through my journey forward, doing different types of research.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And yeah, you're right. When you are on the coalface, you do just make these instinctual decisions, and sometimes your instinct is right and sometimes it's completely wrong as well when there's things happening and it's busy and stressful. And
yeah, and you can only go with what's in front of you, and it's one of my favourite sayings is roughly right, not precisely wrong. So, it's kind of, you've got to get it as right as you possibly can given what you know at that time, and just try to put in contingencies to make sure that it's as safe as possible.
Absolutely. There's definitely been a common theme throughout our discussion so far, I think, of utilising pharmacists or just healthcare professionals in particular to their full skill set. And you've been very heavily involved in this from, I guess, the beginning of expanding scope. Well, even if there is a definite timeline as to when the scope started expanding. But I remember my very first APP conference. I was an intern, so that was 10 years ago. And I can't remember who was the one that was speaking, but they said, we are at a crossroads, and it was, you've got to get on board with the changing scope. It was the first year that pharmacists were allowed to vaccinate that year that I was at APP. So it really opened my eyes as to what pharmacists could do. And so from your perspective, I think the everyday pharmacist, especially when I was an intern and I was seeing all this at APP and people talking about it, what does it actually take to make these changes happen? And I'm sure we probably can't even talk about everything in today's podcast, but if there's a couple of standout things that you think that everyday pharmacist should have some insights into.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because I think sometimes the profession thinks these things just appear from nowhere. Somebody who's trying to get pharmacists prescribing for 30 years now, if it only just appeared, I'd be really happy. We might get there before I retire, right? But I think, for example, with vaccination, that's a really good way of looking at what kind of happens with some of these things. Sometimes it's accidental and it just happens for some reason. But the professional organisations, not just in Queensland but nationally, variously have been talking to the departments of health and anybody that would listen to say pharmacists should be able to be used more. Vaccination is a really good place that we can help you. There's international examples of that. There's different models, et cetera, et cetera. And so the Guild, the PSA particularly had very similar speaking points and talking to points for years before we even got to the starting line. And then I think what we benefited from, and this is what I'm going to talk about, sliding doors and policy windows, we benefited from, at that point, SARS had happened.
Oh, yes, that's right.
So 2002, SARS had happened. And then we had swine flu, had come through, right? And so what governments had seen was that they needed to think about vaccinating, and they needed to think about like antiviral treatments and others. And they'd engaged pharmacists, but they mostly engaged us from a supply point of view. Like, we've got to get antivirals out to people, or, we want everybody to have Cipro or whatever, can you help us with the supply stuff? And the pharmacists are sitting around those tables going, we could probably do some other stuff too. Like, if you're saying that we're in this position. And when they had to vaccinate people en masse, particularly from a Queensland government point of view for swine flu, they started to really reflect on the conversations about having pharmacists participate, because we weren't able to be part of that from a vaccination point of view, or they didn't, enable pharmacists at that point to do it. And so Jeanette Young was public health physician, public health background, very proactive about pharmacists and pharmacists' contributions, medical person by background. One of her key visions for Queensland was her state immunisation policy. And part of that immunisation policy was about prevention and increasing the numbers of people who were vaccinated. And she knew that if she continued to use the current workforce to do that, which was the immunisation providers and the doctors, that they would not be able to achieve it. And so that's where the windows started to open, and all of those conversations started to come home to roost. And then, we got an opportunity to do a pilot that then, started a domino effect for that service. But I think there's, even with UTI, lots of conversations behind the scenes. Professional organisations like the Guild and PSA putting up proposals for election commitments. UTI came out of an election commitment, and then that window opens. And again, roughly right, not precisely wrong. Randomised controlled trials and all sorts of things, they're beautiful, but not practical when a window's opened and you just got to dive through it. And I think there's some of the things that have really helped the change to happen, has been those conversations that have happened combined, the similar talking points about pharmacists being able to do things and similar activities and similar opportunities, then partnered with how it could help the need for ministers who want to get re-elected, public health people who want to meet objectives, and taking it not from the position of the profession wants this because we want to,
we just want to,
blah, blah, blah. It's because we can help you and we can help patients. And that's then opened up these windows. But the challenge, I think, is what you reflected on. It appears for the profession to have popped up from nowhere. And then it sometimes happens in a rush. There's pilot, and then suddenly it's business as usual. And then suddenly we're expecting everybody to have picked up a new service, and people are still catching up with, what's UTI or QPIP or UTIP? What even is that? And, Queensland did it, but why is it in Tasmania? And I think that ability to help the profession through the change process and engaging all the stakeholders, including the educators, the indemnity providers, which we do in some respects during the trials, but I think the educators, particularly in the wider profession, as you're coming through the process, kind of makes it easier when you get out the end and you say, okay, well, now we want to scale this up. How can we do that outside of a pilot environment where we've paid people to do stuff, or we've had people collecting data, or we've had funding, or we've had other kinds of things. So I think being able to bring the profession along a little bit more on some of those things would be really helpful, particularly as we're going forward, because there's going to be more and more and more.
Pharmacy Daily is a proud supporter of your pharmacy career podcast. If you're in the pharmacy world, it's a great resource to stay up to date with the latest industry news. To subscribe, just head to pharmacydaily.com.au to get the newsletter delivered straight to your inbox.
Do you think it's almost, and I think that professional organisations are getting better at even just marketing to their members and non-members what they're doing. I remember when I sat on the branch for PSA a number of years ago, and this was when we were still trying to get vaccinations expanded beyond influenza, which, like, to those listening and probably thinking, oh, what? When was this? That wasn't that long ago. But I think there's a whole lot that gets done behind the scenes that, when you're a pharmacist, whether in a hospital or in a pharmacy, you're just worrying about what's in front of you. And then you get home and you've got family life and you just maybe want to chill out and watch Netflix.
Yeah. Not everybody's, work is life, but it can't be all of your life. And, you've only got a certain aliquot of time that you can contribute to all the things that you need to do. 100% right that, the on-the-ground people are just, and we've looked at this a lot lately in some of our work, is just getting through the day and the cognitive load of the day, as well as other things that they might have going on in their life, is significant. And then you come and say, got this great thing, it's called expanded scope. You just have to do this extra training, and then you're going to have these other people that are coming in the pharmacy, and they're going to want you to come and sit and talk to them. There's like mind exploding. Yeah, it's like, and it's a whole lot of these ones, right? Like it's like, I don't want to do that. Like, even with the best intention and in their hearts knowing that it would contribute to patient care, I 100% get that people are like, no, can't do it, don't want to do it, shouldn't be doing it. And it's there's a whole pile of things in the workforce and how we manage work that we need to bring along on this journey as well.
Oh, absolutely. That's right. I think for the next topic that I want to chat to you about, you mentioned earlier on in the chat about being a rainbow pharmacist. And you've always, as you said, you've always been someone that's passionate about social justice and being who you are. And I think even now, not everyone always feels confident in being able to express who they are, no matter what that is and what that means for them. But maybe you can talk about what your experience has been like and maybe relate that to some advice that you might have for people that are maybe navigating challenges in their identity, whether it's relating to being a rainbow pharmacist or queer person, or even maybe just trying to figure out who the hell you are anyway, and what does being yourself even mean. Like, it doesn't always have to be related to identity and gender, but maybe if you could comment on your experiences and some advice, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks for bringing it up as a topic, because I think it's really important and interesting for the profession to consider more broadly, and a challenge for people individually. And you're right, it's not just about whether you're a rainbow person or a queer person, or whether you come from a culturally or linguistically diverse group or any other thing related to you as an individual. It's how I think we've traditionally looked at what a profession is and what the profession is. And we have created, in a sense, and this is my experience of it anyway, we've created in a sense that this is a profession, and it is, if you are a professional, it is all of you, and it is separate. Being these professionals is separate to being part of a community of people. And it's like, well, actually the professionals are a community of people. And, 20% of pharmacy might be rainbow, and a certain percentage are called, and another percentage are First Nations people. And, the profession is the community, and as it is for other professions too. And so we have an identity as a professional, or an attachment as a pharmacist to being a pharmacist and being part of a profession. But where we've traditionally said, well, that is this thing and it looks like this, and it is in exclusion or in contrast to what your life or your community life is like, that's created antibodies for people and difficulty to work. And we've traditionally had a profession that was more male-dominated, had certain ethnic backgrounds that were more predominant than they maybe are now. It was very traditional, it's a very conservative background. I think that then creates a view of what the profession is or isn't. And if you're in the profession, you have to be that. And it's a very contrasting view to saying that the profession is the community, and people who are in the profession are in the community, and that they're not somehow outside of what that is, and that we're inclusive of that. And I think that's where the challenges kind of come. I think I gave a talk at PSA, and I've talked at a few of the ATUs talking about my experience when I was at university, and in second year professional practice tutes, or whatever you call them, we were doing code of conduct and practice standards and all those kind of things. And the person that was chair of the pharmacy board at the time had come in as our luminous presenter, but used in that context, examples of things that would be conduct unbecoming the profession. One of those was being gay.
Oh, gosh.
And so, I mean, if that's that's taking the view that the profession isn't the community and saying, well, we don't include these things in what we view the profession is, which is really hard when you're sitting in the room listening to that going, maybe I've made a bad choice. But,
that would be a lot to hear, right? Like that's...
Yeah, and I think, we need to take that view that the profession is the community. We are made up of people who are in the community and are from the big community of people. So we get all different walks of life, all different backgrounds, cultural groups, experiences, and that makes us better than the sum of our parts because we get the richness of all of those experiences contribute to making the profession good and better and able to contribute with the skills that we bring as pharmacists to the care to the people, rather than saying that we are in exclusion and outside of what the community looks like. So, yes, I think some of my experiences have probably been of the traditional model of professions.
Yes, I think so, yeah.
This is what it has to look like if you're going to be in this profession versus not. And it's not just pharmacy. I think, I think most professions kind of have cast a view of what their identity is or what they think their identity is. Institutions have particular views about what they think, this is what leader looks like, or these are the people that we're happy to have sit around, a board or a table or a leadership group. And they look like that and you don't look like that. So maybe, even if you've got skills and capabilities, we don't think that you look like what it should be. And that's when you take a view that, you're somehow outside of the group of people that you're supposed to be working with.
I just thinking I'm going to call it a quote now from you that the profession is a community. And as you were talking about what pharmacy is and maybe what society thinks what a pharmacist is and what it should look like. I remember I was working in a pharmacy in a small town, and one of my staff members was experiencing domestic violence, and I found out about this great training called DV Alert. I think it still exists, and I thought, this is so great, like we should. And I found out that it was free for pharmacy staff. And so this was my first time being a manager as well. So I was very going at it with like a bull at a gate. And so I was like, yes, I've got this great idea. I really want to get the DV Alert team out here and train the staff, all pharmacists all the way down to pharmacy assistants, domestic violence. And I didn't want to share my reason why, was that person, they didn't want people to know, and that's fair. And then there's the other issue as well, when you're a manager, all of a sudden I was 18, 19 at the time, and then it's like, I'm now a counsellor and a psychologist as well. But I met some resistance, and one of the feedback I got was, we don't want that type of training done in our pharmacy because we don't want to have those type of people in our pharmacy. And I just remember being so upset, and I just thought, if only you knew we do have them in our pharmacy, they work for you. And no wonder they don't feel safe talking to you about this. And so that really frustrated me, but then it made me more determined to do it anyway. And I said, okay, well, am I allowed to do it? And they said, yeah, if you want to do it, but it's off your own budget. So I did, because we had to do it outside of work hours, and like first year pharmacists out, like you've got no money. So I paid everyone everyone to do the training. And like that, you talk about like sliding door moments in your life. And even just the pharmacy assistant juniors that were like 15, like said to me afterwards, that was so interesting because now I've been to friends' houses and their dad does that, or their mum does this, and like now they've got the education forever. But it always stuck with me when it was, we don't want those people. I'm like, what? But we're healthcare. We have everyone here. Like, what do you think these people look like? And who knows, maybe it came from their own experiences, and maybe there's something that they don't want to share and something that bad experiences. But yeah, I just thought, hang on a minute, no, these are our community. So I really liked what you said, is the profession is the community.
Yeah, and I think it is. We've got all of the people that work with us, but also the people that come to us. community, and they're our neighbours, they're our colleagues, they're our friends. They're people in our social environment in the neighbourhoods that we live in. It's impossible to say that we're not in the community, or that people that would be in pharmacy would not be in the community. I think we're most effective when we are viewed that way and not seen as some pariahs or ivory tower people who are different.
Yes, absolutely. Now, Lisa, I think with one thing that I see in you, especially as someone I've looked up to in the pharmacy, and you're probably going to be embarrassed when people say that to you, like, you're just being you. I'm not anyone special, but the thing that I like, that you still have the same determination, grit, and passion. And I hope that, I can maintain this passion about what I'm wanting to do in my pharmacy career. And so what fuels you to keep going? Or maybe even why? We had a little chat about this before we started the recording, and maybe the question is, why do you keep going?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. You're right. We kind of talked a little bit about this beforehand, and I've had some challenging experiences with some of the scope of practice reform. Not everybody's loved it. I know you're shocked by that, but some of our colleagues in health have not been particularly kind to pharmacy, but also not particularly personally kind. And if they knew that it just made me more pissed off and more determined, they may dial it back a little bit. But I think for me, it maybe does, come back to the fact that I think I'm quite patient as a person. I'm prepared to play a long game. That's probably why I love golf. It challenges me, and it is a long game, and you're probably never going to master it. That's probably why it resonates with me as a sport. But in my other life, I'm a hockey goalkeeper. I'm also really determined, like mongrel in me, to keep the people and the ball out of the goal is pretty significant. So I think part of it is that I really struggle watching when people don't do things, but I know that they have power, or they have influence, or they have means or mechanisms to do things, and they don't do it. And variously, that's been individuals and organisations who, for whatever reason, have not actioned things or done things to help the greater good of what needs to be achieved. And I think I'm prepared to try and push through that, because I can see a vision of a greater good, and not just for pharmacy, but for health, around having skilled and competent and trained people that you trust helping you. And I think that's really, even in my manager life, if there are people that have power and influence and whatever and are not doing things, I'm just as mental in my university leadership life as I am outside, because I think, and it's hard. Like, I've been privileged to have, a supportive family, and, a partner who's really supportive in, how we manage our life. And I've got, a gift of time sometimes to do the travel and the contributions. Not everybody has that. I appreciate that. And so I take a piece of that responsibility for people that I know are passionate and determined, but don't have the time or the capacity or the capability. And I think, these are the people that I have to do this for. If I've got the time and I've got a platform, if I've got the means, I've got the resources, then, I need to do this and see it through. So that's kind of, I think it comes from way back, that if you're going to commit to doing stuff, you need to go all in. You need to, if you tell people that you're going to help them, you help them. And if somebody said, we want to do this thing, I need your help. And if I said yes, then I have to follow that through, even if it's, 5-10 year journey.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I can definitely see now why you enjoy golf. It sure is a long game when you're doing the whole game. Although I am a fan of mini golf.
Yeah. Mini golf is okay. Yeah, big golf is better.
Golf is better. I actually live next to a golf course, so I've been saying to my hubby that I want to learn how to play golf, but he's much better at it than me. So I think I'm like dragging the chain.
I aspire to live next to a golf course.
Well, next time you're in Sydney, you can come and visit.
It's a date.
Well, thank you, Lisa, for joining me on the podcast today. It's been really, really insightful getting to know you more personally, and I know our listeners will have appreciated your honesty and transparency as well. Is there any final thoughts or anything else you'd like to share before we sign off?
I'm going to steal something from some of your pre-list. I think I would put a call out to, people that are in the early parts of their career. And this was advice I got given really early on as well by a wise mentor, Sue Tet. Basically say yes and work out the detail later. That you will have lots of opportunities come up in the profession to contribute and make changes and be involved. And if people give you opportunities and invite you, say yes if you can. Don't doubt yourself. Don't, think that you have to have a PhD or I'm not smart enough or I didn't do any education or I haven't done that before. Say yes and work out the detail because the profession needs people to commit to the profession moving forward. Can't kind of rely on a few people to continue to move it forward. We need a mass of people who want the profession to move forward to sort of lean in. And I think to our point around pharmacists are the community and communities are pharmacists, I think if I went back to, being a young person and, I think this is exactly where I should have been. I should have been a pharmacist or in health. I absolutely should have been. So that subconscious, thing that's led me here, I think it's worked out okay. But I think also, just be yourself. Because we have, as a profession evolved and a society evolved, we're less about widgets that all look the same, that have to be the same. And I think, being yourself and being okay with that is half of the battle. If you feel okay with that, then mostly I've found other people are okay with it as well.
Oh, great way to end a podcast. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Thanks for tuning in to Your Pharmacy Career Podcast, proudly sponsored by the Pharmaceutical Society of Australia. The PSA is committed to empowering pharmacists through advocacy, innovation, and industry-leading professional development. To become a member or learn more about how the PSA can support your career, visit www.psa.org.au. Don't forget to subscribe, share this podcast with your colleagues, and join us next time as we continue to explore your pharmacy career journey.